Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Dylan Brennan. Dylan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Oh, excellent, excellent. Well, I'm glad that we could get you on anytime that I have a future Christopher Paolini. It feels good to, talk to them. I'm a teacher, so, it feels good to talk to, some younger people about writing. And I always try to get my kids, my students involved in, art or writing. So it's really nice to see, that you had this goal in mind, and you just went for it. And I'm jealous because I was about 14 and started writing my stuff, and I don't think I finished until 2 years ago. So I'm like 34. So you're way ahead of the curve, which is pretty awesome. So I think we're all really anxious to, get to, ask you some questions and hear your answers and, take some insight from it. So we'll go with that first one there, Dylan. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's been very brief so far, but I would have probably first gained a true love for writing in probably primary school, which is year three, so I think fourth grade there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so yeah, that would have been the point. Like my teacher at that point, like really pushed my writing and really wanted. He saw that I had like a gift for it and really wanted me to excel in it. And from that point forwards, I just kept trying to like develop it. And then got into secondary school, and there's less of a focus on writing in secondary school English, but there is still like one question that allows you to do some creative writing. So I did manage to still practice it. And then when we got to quarantine, uh, because nothing was going on anyway, I thought it was the perfect opportunity to start a big writing project, and that led to the birth of Novel Betrayed. And then I worked on that one for about 2 years, got it released in October, and yeah, now we've just been focusing on marketing it. And yeah, that's my writing journey so far. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. So I'm just curious. When you say like you're doing some creative writing and things like that at school, like so would that still have been in the genre of fantasy? Did you get to choose, or were you just kind of writing? So you're just writing school stuff basically at the time.
Yeah, it's a lot more limited than that. It's just they'll either give you a topic and you write a story including that topic, or they'll give you a picture and you have to write a story about the picture.
Oh, that's
That was
awesome.
it. You don't get a lot of freedom with what you write.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I tend to find that a lot too. Like where I'm at here in New York State, I just feel like, I just talked to a teacher about this the other day. They said, well, would you like to do? I said, well, I really like to start an actual like writing course, for students who, want to write their own thing. I feel like too many times, in education, we make you guys do our thing and, ends up I always worry that I'm going to stifle someone's creativity like yourself. I'm worried that, if I gave somebody an opportunity, they would be able to write a book like, like you did, Noble Betrayed. So yeah, I was just curious there. But I was actually using you as an example the other day, actually, for why, we should be able to, why we should have the freedom to allow kids to, to choose more of the things they want to write, particularly, in our English classes. We have so many standards here in the United States. It's kind of crazy. And I think it tends to water down the skills of young people like yourself. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's really cool.
especially in the UK, the exam is very limiting. In
Mm.
my like actual GCSE exam, the picture that we got was a picture of like a house in Mexico or something,
Oh, okay.
and it still had the watermark and everything on the picture, and it just said write a story based on this picture. That was it.
Oh,
So
wow.
I just went around describing the house and things like that,
Yeah, yeah.
using metaphors and things like that, but it's focusing more on showing that you know how to use things than using them in a creative way, which is not the way I think that it should be taken.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, to me, it's interesting. I'm a martial artist, so like we learn certain things, and then you try to apply them yourself later. And we try to do that. When it comes to higher education, but it's just kind of interesting. It makes me wonder, like if we did things differently, if we have more students like yourself, more young people who would be able to to write books a lot sooner, or to, to do these great works of art. I have amazing artists, and yeah, it really makes me feel like we're not doing you guys justice, and maybe also, making you guys kind of shun writing or reading, or some of those things that you'd be really good at, and I think some people pick them up back again later once they're done with primary school, or or secondary or something like that. So yeah, kind of interesting there. Yeah, yeah. I mean, my educator mind thinking there a little bit more, but that's interesting. So for that second question, which was one of my favorites to ask people about their products and their, their writing in particular, what is your book Noble Betrayed about, and how did you come up with this idea?
I guess I'll start with the inspiration. So I think there it's really hard to pin down a specific inspiration
For
for
sure.
what gave birth to it, but I was reading a lot of fantasy
Mm.
during quarantine, so it was like the genre that I would have had in mind. So like I think I read the entire Song of Ice and Fire series during
Oh,
quarantine. I read The Witcher as well. I have The Gilded Age. I have tons of fantasy and sci-fi, which I mean, obviously I didn't use that genre, but a lot of the concepts and writing style and stuff would have factored in.
yeah.
Um, and fantasy is always just something that I've loved. Um, I love like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, things like that. And my dad was also watching Game of Thrones at the time, so that
Cool.
I wasn't able to escape fantasy more or less. Um, and yeah, Noble Betrayed is there are tons of characters, but I'll just try and focus on who I would say is the protagonist. So the protagonist's name is Simon Parjan, and he's a lord, so like he's a noble, and hence the title Noble Betrayed.
Mm,
And he's quite reserved compared to most nobles. He's not really what you would expect from someone in an upper class.
mm,
Um, but he gets called upon by the king, who is his old friend. This king's name is Eminar Woodgerd, and he wants him to be his high all, and high all is the second in command, sort of. So it's really high up,
mm,
and it's not something that he would usually accept, but he has to take it for the good of the kingdom, so he does.
mm.
But it comes at a really terrible time because his wife Gwendis seizes the opportunity to try and get revenge against Simon because he domestically abused her in the past.
Mm.
And additionally, the council also find out that there is a rumored plot to assassinate the king, which is being conducted by Gwendis's brother Tyrell, who is also a point of view character.
Oh wow.
And yeah, everything just gets worse and worse. People die, uh, and a lot of betrayal happens. And yeah, then there are other points of view characters who have completely different stories. So, for example, my favorite to write was their son. So Simon and Gwendis' son, Dayron, he is deaf. He's 9 years old as well.
Mm.
So writing from his point of view is really interesting because you can't rely on dialogue and you need
Yeah,
to make
yeah,
sure that you're writing in the mindset of a child.
yeah.
And his story involves him finding a child, like baby griffin, and
Wow.
they go on this really mad adventure, which leads to them uncovering a really like nature changing mystery about the kingdom, which almost completely changes the story and makes you look at everything from a different angle without spoiling what it is.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's super.
uh yeah, I focused on the other kids as well, like their two daughters, Christine and Anit. Their stories are quite linked. They're kind of like Sansa and Arya in Game of Thrones, that kind of
Oh, cool.
dynamic, but not completely the same, but yeah, similar. There's Damon Parjan, who is he's a ranger. He's in a like desert type area, doing missions for the king, and it involves some tribal chieftains who are based on like Hungarian cultures.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then there's also Dunton Slate, who is the queen's brother, and he's found out that the queen is having an affair, and he hates his sister, so he's just he's just causing mischief around the kingdom. And then there's their sister as well, Sylvina, who is very like attuned to nature, I guess. She
Mm.
has dreams where she sees demons and things like that, and she thinks
Oh,
that they're all linked to what's going on in the kingdom, so she's exploring that as well. So yeah, we're going all over the place, but everything does link together in the end.
well, that's super cool. You definitely see, like the George R. R. Martin influences for you
Yeah.
there. Really cool. But seems like you really turn some things on their head. So anytime someone has a griffin, I'm like, yep, I'm down for that. I absolutely love griffins. Everybody always is into dragons. I'm into griffins.
Yeah, I'm bored of dragons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like dragons are cool, but I've seen them too many times.
Yeah, yeah.
They're always used as like the big imposing creature. I want to see something
Yep.
else.
Yeah, no, totally. And I don't know if you've ever, I'll have to try to send you the article. There's like this one, oh, there's this one author that I was talking to a couple years ago, and he actually wrote this really interesting article. And I'm totally now, I feel so bad. I'm forgetting what the magazine was. I don't even know if they're still around. It was a really big fantasy one about 4 years ago. I think now they're mostly online. But he wrote The Science of Griffins. And it was so interesting because he basically was like, yeah, this is a physically impossible creature. And when I was writing mine for this one rough draft, I just loved that. And I was like, okay, so they're clearly going to be a magical creature because they wouldn't be able to. I kind of took his article and kind of went with it, but it was really interesting. Like he dissected it from a scientific standpoint, but then went back in with the fantasy aspect, and it just made the Griffin to me so much cooler. Yeah, it was awesome. And he did the same thing for like he did like a dragon article, but the Griffin one was way cooler. So ever since then, I've just been like mesmerized by griffins and everybody's writing and stuff. Thiago Abdallah actually does a really good griffin too. If you ever have a second with like a touch of light, and he's got book 2 out now. But yeah, he does griffins in a really cool way if you like griffins. So yeah, but that's really
Yeah,
cool.
my one is still a child, so it's kind of like a baby Yoda type
That's
thing where
cool.
it just has like a lot of cute moments and it's
Oh,
just
that's
sort of a
awesome.
sidekick. But yeah,
Yeah.
it will
Oh, cool.
grow
Like they grow
eventually.
up together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Oh, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely addicted to that. And so just because you mentioned a lot of your characterization, I'm actually going to switch 3 and 4 around here. So
That's
how do you
fine.
go about creating characters that your audience will care about? To me, it sounds like Oh, to me, it sounds like you already have, a good idea of, who your characters are. I already am really interested in several of your characters, particularly the Ranger, because and I love the desert setting as well, and doing missions for the King. So to me, I'm like, okay, I really definitely want to find more out, about that character. But also the sisters, how you describe them. I'm like, okay, I want to see what their relationship is like. But how do you go about creating characters that people like myself want to read about?
So the very first thing that I did when planning this book was the actual first thing that I did was writing the prologue,
Hmm.
which it could have worked as a standalone, but I think it works a lot better as a wider story, like the
Hmm.
opening. But
Okay.
after that, I wrote a sort of
Yeah.
like appendix type thing, just listing all the characters and their relations and stuff like that. I zoned in on ones that I
Smart.
think were in a position where they could have an interesting story. And then the first thing that I designed was their flaw. So what is it that makes them flawed? What is it that makes them an interesting character to read about? Because I'm not a big fan of writing characters that are perfect in any way,
Oh yeah.
unless they're meant to be like gods or something.
Yeah. Mm.
Um, yeah, so establishing the flaws and then going into detail about like their backstory, things like that. And then eventually you do all the things that people say are like sort of you need to have this planned out before you write it, and then by the time you're done you just have this giant sprawling uh sort of almost like a mind map of details about this one character, and then you just keep doing that.
Yeah. I'm right in the middle right now myself. I got these 2 characters, and I was just kind of gonna write them, and I was like, oh, they're really flat for a Kindle Bell series, and that's all I've been doing for like the last like 3 weeks. Is I was, and yeah, I like how you said though, like mind map. I guess that's more what I'm doing. People always call it notes, right? I know Brandon Sanson writes like a whole page on somebody as that character before he like starts to write. So it's interesting to for me to ask different authors their different processes. So would you say that? So it's interesting to me that you went with your prologue first. So you went with your prologue and kind of. So would you say that you kind of did like a mind map there of just the general story, what was going on, kind of like a general start to the story, or was that kind of more like a general outline for you? Or
Yeah, I didn't initially plan to write a huge book. I wrote the prologue intending for it to be a standalone fantasy story.
oh wow, okay.
uh at, like just that, like a short story, but then I decided that why do that when I could just do a whole book in this universe, because I really like the universe.
Nice.
So it's just like a really short story that it introduces some really key characters in the story anyway, so it does have significance. But it's
Oh,
just a
cool.
thing about a really unimportant side character called Ankerson, who gets a mission from his superior to go and poison somebody, but then it backfires and results in his death. That's it. But it introduces a lot of key characters and the key themes and concepts in the book, so it ended up being the sort of the signpost for what was to come.
Oh, that's cool. So it sounds to me like instead, I don't know, like David Eddings. I love David Eddings, but he gives you like Robert Jordan too. I think give you like this whole book beforehand, and you never know quite how it's going to connect with the story, And I
Yeah.
feel like there were a lot of ones I read like when I was your age, like Forgotten Realms and stuff. Like some of them did a really good job. Some of them I'm like, I have no idea. Even after the book ended, I'm like, I have no idea how the prologue, helped set up the book at all. But I like yours because to me it sounds like you gave us kind of like a sample or a taste of your world and your story ahead of time. So it sounds like you did it in a much smarter way than some of us. So that's awesome. Well, you did mention one of my favorite words there in universe. So we'll go back to that third one there. When it comes to world building for your world or your universe, what were the first steps that you took?
So originally it was just meant to be a purebred sort of fantasy story. So I was just focusing on assigning the key locations and like the laws that apply to the world. Although the laws are mostly like standard fantasy laws, except there's less of a focus on like magic and mythical creatures and things like that. They do exist, but they're not like massively populating the world or anything.
Hmm.
They're just there in small doses because I'm more interested in the human side of fantasy than the mystical side generally, not
Yeah.
always. um and yeah, so establishing the key locations, the laws, and then I decided upon the twist that I alluded to with Dayrun, and that completely changed everything. So I realized that I needed a way to be able to link this twist to what I already had. So it was about devising that. And then in the process, I also ended up devising a whole pantheon of gods and things like that.
Oh,
And what one thing that does apply to my story is every house has their own religion,
oh,
and
that's cool.
but the reality is that they're all actually constructs and none of them are actually real. They're just
Oh, wow.
they're constructs designed by the council to keep people believing in something
Wow, you
greater
went
than
really, really
themselves.
meta there. You were really meta society. Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, so it was just like small details. Eventually I'd be writing a chapter and I realized I needed something else, so I added another small detail and then made sure that that worked with everything that I had already written, like things like medicines and like herbs and things like that. And yeah, it ended up just evolving into this giant world. It's just called the Great Kingdom. It doesn't have a name, and there is a reason why it doesn't have a name,
Oh,
but
that's cool.
again, I won't go into that.
That's cool. Sorry, you just blew my mind with like the socioeconomic standpoint of having basically like religions that each house has where they're constructed. That to me is like as a social studies teacher, that's a really cool concept. I feel like we talk about that a lot. When it comes to world religions and not necessarily the religion itself, but the power struggle with those that are in charge of the religion or or whatever. So that to me is really cool in a fantasy setting. So I think you brought up some interesting socioeconomic or sociological points there, which to me I don't know. That just seems really cool to me. I like how you also said though, because I think this is a big question that a lot of people, a lot of fantasy authors have to ask themselves. And I've been asking myself this I got this Kindle Vella series. It's called Twin Flames. I really just like grim dark fantasy. I love Conan the Barbarian, Fritz Libner, with Farhad and Gray Mauser. Paul S. Kemp does a great job with Hammer and the Blade, like capturing the buddy cop aspect of like a fantasy setting. So I was like, oh, I want to do that, but I keep asking myself, I'm like you, I'm like, well, do I want to focus on the humans or do I, how much magic is there going to be? How many magical creatures are there going to be? Is it, they're going to be overrun, with them, or are they going to be kind of dying out, sort of thing? So I think that's an interesting question, that you asked yourself. So I like how you said you went with, I would say more like, right, like a, George R. R. Martin, he's got magic and there are dragons, but right, they're not exactly being overrun, right, with magical items or things like that. But how did you Was that like a really big question that you asked yourself before you got started then? Or was that something that you developed over time where you're like, okay, I'm gonna have a griffin, but maybe they're gonna be rarer, things like that?
Yeah, I did initially want it to be high fantasy, but when I devised the
Okay.
twist that I keep mentioning, because it just completely changes everything, so
Yeah.
I'm trying to push it. But when I devised that twist, I realized that no, I want it to be low fantasy because that's the way the twist comes across in the best way.
Oh, that's cool.
And yeah,
Oh, that's
so that was what answered the question for me. It wasn't actually as complex for me as it might be for a lot of other authors.
yeah. That's interesting. Would you say that later on, like maybe, once you've written a little bit more in this universe, would you say that you would maybe try to, write a high fantasy later on? I mean, was that something that maybe you'd be interested in or?
Yeah, maybe. I'm planning on exploring other genres as well, which I'll get into that later when we talk about like current
Oh,
projects
oh,
and things
cool.
like that. But yeah, I will go back to fantasy at some point when Noble is done, which I don't know when Noble will be done, but probably within the next 10 years, definitely.
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. It's just that it's always interesting to me because like it's funny because like I feel like people lately, the authors I've talked to a lot of authors in a day, let alone the last 2 years, and it's just interesting because I tend to find people in multiple camp in just two camps instead of multiple camps. Me, like depending on the world I'm in, the characters, I will work with the different amounts of magic or different amounts of magical creatures, whatever. I say my Kindle Bella series has less magic and less mythological creatures or magical creatures, but my own fantasy stuff from my novels has more. So, but it's funny because I find people like they either like only write stuff in low fantasy or they only write stuff in high fantasy. And it's funny where, or maybe they're in between, but like, it's like they tend to stick in their lane a little bit. So to me, it's always interesting to find somebody like myself who's like, yeah, I would write low fantasy here because of this story and these characters, and I might write high fantasy here because of this interesting story or concept I have. So I always think it's interesting to ask people. So this is my next question, which I'm really excited to hear your answer for. How many books do you plan in this fantasy world that you've created?
Probably three, but
Oh,
then that's just three main entries. There is one book that I've got more or less planned out, which is going to be a sort of spin-off focusing on one group of characters that I'm going to introduce in the second book
oh, that's awesome.
because their story is really important to understanding what goes on in the third book, but I think it would take up too much space in the third book, so I want to write it separately.
That's
So
smart.
so it's more like 3.5, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's smart. I like how you said that you're gonna. To me, that's a smart marketing from a marketing standpoint. To me, I think that's really smart because if you get people that like your first book and especially get into your second book, which most authors, I think when I did the statistics recently, I was looking at Amazon statistics. I think it's around like it's got to be like 67 to about 72% of authors do better with their second book. Happened with my friend Christopher G. Brennan. He had his first book. And people were like, "Oh, okay, what is this?" But then once people started trying it, once after a year and a half, it's out, book two comes out, bam, all of a sudden people are like, oh, hey. And that's what he decided to do as well, with a novella with some different characters. And I think he's been talking about doing that. But I have seen that work for people like him and a couple of my other friends recently, in particular, with spinning off the second book characters. That I haven't seen too many statistics on the sales that happened after, but I just know from the amount of people that I see online, sharing this, like let's say you did that and you have your second book in this trilogy, finish your third book, and then do the spinoff. The amount of people I've seen with that fourth book or that new spinoff book, I mean, I've seen a lot of them plastered everywhere. So I assume that their sales, have to be doing pretty well because they're not ARC readers or anything or reviewers. It's actual customers. So to me, that seems really smart. It'll be interesting for I think all of us to kind of see how that works out for you marketing wise. But personally, I've seen it work really well for some of my author friends. So I hope that it does the same for you. But to me, that as a reader, I'm like really interested because I think a lot of times, you get those secondary characters, particularly Game of Thrones. And I'm reading Steven Erickson right now, Mal's Book of the Fallen. And sometimes it's like, I'm like, I want a book about these characters, and they never talk about them again. So I think that happens with a lot of people, particularly for me in a trilogy, it happens in book two. So I think personally, that's a very, very smart thing that you're doing. So I'd be very
I
interested.
do I do think that that's one thing that I can know what the education system does with English. In terms of the literature side, they do encourage you to explore every single character's perspective, like even like the minor characters' perspectives. And because of that, that's why perspective is something that I'm really interested in. And that's why I want to write that spin-off book in the first place.
Okay. Hmm. I think you just answered a question why a lot of my author friends are from your region of the world because it's very I when you bring up an interesting character or they have an interesting backstory or something. Like I think I haven't read Joe Abercrombie yet. I know I'm horrible. I have a bunch of them behind me. But I have a friend who he really likes a lot of his characters, but at times he'll bring up an interesting character and then that character dies like, you know, two sentences or a paragraph later. And my friend's like, oh, I wish he explored that person a little bit more. So yeah, that's really cool. But a lot of my friends, particularly from the UK, really seem to do a really good job of that and exploring those different characters. And I think that's why a lot of times I find, their writing a lot more interesting. I can seem to connect with it a lot more. So that's interesting though. I didn't realize it was from your guys's like education system. So that actually really makes me think a little bit more about how I teach writing in the future. So I think that makes a lot more sense. That's really cool.
Also
Go ahead.
oh yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Also death doesn't have to necessarily be the end of a character's development. You can still reveal stuff about them later after their death that reveals like a tons more layers of their character. Like I just recently watched this show called Dark. It's a time travel show on Netflix, and a lot of the characters do die. They show their death really early on, but because it's time travel oriented, you end up seeing them when they're younger and learning more
Hmm.
about their backstory and things like that. And then there's a character that died at the end of season 2, I think. But then in season 3, they showed what he was like as a child and everything, and suddenly one of the like most evil characters in the entire show ends up becoming one of the most sympathetic.
Hmm.
Even though he's already dead, you're still able to sympathize with them.
Oh, that's cool. Hmm. I guess I never really. That's a really good point. I actually never really thought about that. So would you say? That's a really good point. I was thinking like maybe trying to think of different ways to do that without time travel as well. Maybe through like different characters, like their character development.
Yeah, it could be anything. It's like
Good point.
Great Gatsby, when he dies, they put
That's a
in a
great point.
chapter with his dad.
Yeah,
It can be like revealing new characters that give you new perspectives on them, like diary entries, things like that, anything.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. I have to write that one down in my journal. I always take notes after these, so I'm gonna have to really think about that. That to me seems like a really interesting, like you said, you have one character that you're just like, find really interesting to write, his perspective, particularly, with having certain needs and, not being able to do the dialogue. So I think that also is really interesting. So writing somebody, maybe the challenge would be writing a really interesting character, give you a little bit, like you said with Dark, and then, have them be, more of a major character later on, and they're not even there. So I think that is I think that's a really good point though. Like particularly with like the book and the TV show 13 Reasons Why, I think, like that character, the main character, I just couldn't believe how much they did that with her character. I thought that
Yeah, Hannah. Yeah,
yeah, Hannah, thank you. I was trying to think of her name. Yeah, like I mean, I've never, yeah, I was like, I never had considered doing that from a writer standpoint. So I think you make a really good point with that. I think that's a really good example. Everyone keeps mentioning Dark. I'm gonna have to watch Dark now. I
it's
think the
amazing.
third
It's
author,
amazing.
yeah, like three interviews in a row where people mention Dark. So I'll have to tell my friend Michael that you suggested it too, and I'll have to check it out tonight when my son hopefully is sleeping. But for that sixth one, what has been your greatest struggle when it comes to your writing and maybe trying to get your book out there? And then what has also been your greatest accomplishment?
Okay, when it comes to writing, I think the biggest struggle is like the filler from A to B. Like, when you have like a starting point with a chapter and you know what the ending is going to be. I'm having that right now with the book I'm writing at the moment, where I knew that this chapter has an absolutely amazing ending and it's going to really like resonate with people. But it's about filling stuff in before you get to that point because you just can't cut straight to it.
Yeah, yeah.
You need to make people care more about that character before you can do stuff
Yeah.
that makes people really resonate with them. You can't just throw it in. But writing that filler, you need to really think about it and how you actually do the development without making it feel like it drags on, which then lessens their enjoyment of the chapter.
Yeah. No, totally. I think I have one character in my fantasy book, A Thief's Ambition. It's like I just tell people, I'm like, if you can just get to the end of this, like the three, the climactic part, I'm like, you're gonna hate this character, but if you can get to the climactic part, I see like Johnny Lawrence in the Cobra Kai series, or maybe some of them. I got really into the redemption arcs. I was never into them, and then that show really made me love redemption arcs. So I was like, okay, I want that to be like a main theme. So I changed a lot of things, and I'm like, okay, you're gonna absolutely hate her, but then later on, and I give you some reasons why I think you would really, understand her position, maybe not agree, but you understand her position. She's trying to do the right thing, but just in the wrong way. And I think a lot of us, could really connect with that. But I think that was a big thing I kept thinking about. I'm like, ooh, like I kept thinking like, is this just filler, or like how do I get people to care about her, this situation, or and I think one of the hardest things, I don't know about you, but like trying to even like a villain, right? Like I was thinking of like Dr. Octopus from the original Spider-Man 2, where I felt like Sam Raimi did a great job making that character relatable. He's a villain, but at the same time, you were able to understand why he was a villain, and why he was doing the things that he was doing. But I always think it's hard to, get an audience to follow along with that and to try and understand those people, even if they're, the most evil character, or something like that. But just trying to at least see like, oh, what did they do next? Like Darth Vader, right? Like who's he gonna choke out next, or who's he gonna have a cool lightsaber fight with? So I think that you're right. The filler is always, to me, is always I think the hardest part, because we all know where we want to go, right? For the most part, end of the book or a chapter. But yeah, that in between part, I think you're totally right there. What would you say your greatest accomplishment was?
um well, I mean, it would be getting the book released, but I mean, in terms of like since then, I did get to speak at a literary festival,
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
I gave a whole like probably like 5 minute speech
Oh, that's
about
cool.
like empowering young people in writing and things like that. And everyone was clapping and things like that. People were coming up
That's
to me telling
awesome.
me my speech was amazing and things like that.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
great.
so that would be up there. Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, I mean, I think you're one of, of maybe five, authors, under a certain age that I could name within the fantasy genre, and I think that is in itself, a really great accomplishment. I mean, you know, like we always say it for martial arts, like the like 99% of people quit before they're a black belt. And then I got my second degree black belt. I've done a lot of other martial arts after that. I'm working on my third degree for Taekwondo. So as I keep going, it's like, the percentages get smaller of people that are, like me. And I think of that for authors all the time. I mean, you think like if you wrote one book, like you did, you're already in a very small percentage. We have a lot of books out there, but compared to how many people wanted to write a book, I think it's gotta be way less than 1%. So if you're writing book two already, I think personally, you're already, again, you're shrinking that percentage of people, that you're like, particularly with your, age category. So for me, that's really cool. So I think that, that's all just an absolutely great accomplishment. So that's really cool. You mentioned books earlier, some of them, but what games or books do you think have influenced your writing the most?
Um, I'll try to touch more on games, because I've already mentioned the books that inspired me the most. But yeah, I mean, I play a lot of games. I think I played The Witcher 3 around that time, which is like, yeah, that game is amazing.
Yeah.
And that definitely would have inspired me somewhat. Maybe like Red Dead
Oh, nice.
Redemption 2, probably God of War, things like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I like a lot of like single player story games and things like
Yeah,
that.
me
So
too.
they've all inspired me at least a little bit.
Now, one question I have, just because we're obviously there's a little bit of an age gap between us here. Have you tried playing Diablo 2 remastered yet?
No, but I do want to.
So for me, Diablo 2, particularly the expansion pack, like I played a lot. I was just talking to my buddy about this today. I'm like, him and I, he's like 4 years older than me. So I'm 36. And it was just funny because like we were just talking about games that influenced our writing. And um I was like, Diablo 2 for me was just like absolutely amazing. I mean, I had never really been into like Grimdark before that, or anything like that. I was more just into for like Forgotten Realms, Baldur's Gate, and stuff. But yeah, Diablo 2 for me is still like my favorite game of all time. And when they decide they're like Diablo 3 wasn't any good, I don't think. I'm pretty excited for Diablo 4. But yeah, like the quests you go on, just from a writer standpoint, I think Oblivion, like Morrowind and Oblivion and Diablo 2 from a writer standpoint had some of the coolest quests that I've ever been on, or things I did, as like in a video game. And the overall, I think, story arcs were just absolutely amazing from a writer standpoint. So yeah, I'd highly recommend that one. There's a
I
lot of
think,
cool things you go do.
yeah, in terms of like games with like really good quests, the Mass Effect trilogy, that's another one for me.
That's a great one. Yep.
Yeah, Ghost of Tsushima, I think, was the game that I played.
Oh,
It was like the first one that I played that got me into like a huge, like, sort of like massive like grind of different games.
oh, that's awesome.
And then at the moment I'm playing Elden Ring, so that's
Oh,
probably going to influence me at some point as well.
I promised myself I would not play that until my urban fantasy novellas are done. And I'm about like, I would say like almost like 2/3 the way for the three, but I was like, I'm not doing it until that's going to be like my crowning achievement is buying that for myself at the end of the summer. Yeah, it's like my author prize to myself, but I feel like I'll just get too addicted to it. Like I'll either just be like with my son and then playing that. I feel like no writing is going to get done for myself at least. But yeah, that's super cool. Ghost of Tsushima, I totally forgot about that one. I played that one a little bit with a friend, and that's one I keep needing to buy for myself. But yeah, that's super cool. I love games. I think games are just a really good way, because you get to see other people's writing. And Dragon Age, especially the original one, I think was a really good one. That one to me really got me in college, like back into writing. It was really, really good and really fun. But all right. So my second favorite question here: do you have any news, updates, promos, or current projects that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I've got two like drafts at the moment. So one of them is the sequel to Noble Betrayed, which
Okay.
is Noble Divided, and I've written about maybe like 100 pages of that.
Oh wow.
It's all planned out at this point, but I just haven't actually written it out. But then the book that I'm going to be releasing next, I know it's a really big sort of stray, but I'm writing a book called Master Misfortune, which is it's going to be a sort of romantic tragedy, I guess, but not like overly romantic or anything. It's more on the tragedy side. Um, it revolves around a character called Leon Fox, who is extremely obsessed with being like his favorite fictional characters, and that leeches into his like ways with how he like behaves around women and things like that. And it ends up causing the downfall of both him and a lot of other characters in the story.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, the message is that people should be careful about how devoted they get to being like people from fiction.
Oh, that's cool. That's a really cool theme. I like that. It's probably one I should think about because I'm just really into I'm watching an old show called Walker Texas Ranger with Chuck Norris, and I grew up on it, and it's fun for me now to it's just I like free on one of our stations here. It's fun to rock my son, and we kind of been like watching it together, so to speak. But yeah, it's funny because I have been dissecting different characters from the 90s, and he just happened to be one of them. But it's funny that you mentioned that because there was a show a movie a while back where there was a character that did that, and that was like that was the character's flaw was that he saw himself as this like 80s character from like a sci-fi movie, and he thought he was him totally. I think the guy from Dodgeball too, the redhead, I forget, he like acts like a pirate, right? So I definitely think that you're onto something there, because I don't think a lot of people they've always explored those characters and the theme as a secondary character or a theme that's very counterproductive or counterintuitive, I think, to the actual story. So I think you really focusing on that to me sounds like a really great idea. And I don't think too many people have explored that, in at least my opinion, really since like maybe like Walter Mitty, which I absolutely loved that character. But yeah, I think that was written in like 1949 or something like that. So I think that's a really cool concept for you to explore. So be interested to see that. I like to see too that you're trying some different things out too, and I think that'll help your overall writing in particular. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I put Noble 2 on hiatus so that I could finish Master Misfortune, because I wanted to make sure that people realized that fantasy wasn't the only thing I was interested in doing.
Smart, smart.
And so yeah, Master Misfortune's a lot shorter because it's not like a it's probably going to be standalone because it ends with tragedy.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I just wanted to push that one out to make sure that people know that fantasy isn't the only thing I'm interested in exploring, and then I'll go like full in on Noble until it's done.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, that's really cool. I think that's really smart for just an experience perspective, but also from a marketing perspective for you. So, yeah, I think that's smart. That's why I'm doing like urban fantasy. I love reading urban fantasy. Fantasy is like I think it's easier for me to write. I also kind of been doing the thing with a sci-fi, so I totally feel you there. I always get afraid of getting put into one box, and then not be able to expand readership, or maybe even not expand my actual writing skills. So I think that's really smart that you're already thinking about that, just from a writing perspective, but also from an advertising perspective. So very smart on your part. Well, Dylan, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. I'm really glad that we could get you on. I'm really anxious, to read your book and to check out your twist in particular. As soon as you said Griffin, I'm like, all right. It was already on my list, but I'm like, okay, it moved up there. And then you said Ranger, which has got to be, besides Paladin, my second favorite word to hear within fantasy. Desert setting is always a one. I don't know why I'm addicted to desert setting, because I hate the sand, but I love, Rangers in a desert setting. But yeah, I'm really anxious to read your book. If there's anything, we can do in the meantime, to help you out, to spread the word. Like I said, there's the Facebook group. You can always go in there and post. I'll send that to you guys. But if there's anything else we can do at all, just let me know. I'll be sending, you guys an email along shortly, next couple of months, so we can get our stuff going over the summer. And before this interview comes out, we'll plaster the schedule and, your book everywhere. But yeah, if there's anything else we can do in the meantime, just let me know, and we'll help you out as best we can. So.
Okay.
For our audience, just as a reminder, you can find Dylan's book and his socials in the description. That's for all of our authors, so just don't forget, that's why we're here. So please make sure you go and click on the link, and make sure you're clicking and checking out his book, Noble Betrayed. And we're also just reminding people, please, 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 authors like Dylan and myself, and anybody we've had on here, we really thrive on reviews. So please make sure any product that you are buying and reading, please make sure you're reviewing it, because that's like helping out twice as much for all of us, including authors like Brennan. Or Dylan, sorry. So Dylan, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And like I said, if there's anything else we can do for my friend, you just let me know, and we'll help you out as best we can.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. Like I said, I'll be sending some seminar stuff. So if you guys think that like those would be some of the ones you'd be interested in, the world building ones, I'm gonna have like 3 different ones. So if there's something like that, or one of the characterization ones, and you want to try to join that, feel free, and we'll send you a link and get you situated. So
Okay.
cool. All right, Dylan, you have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you later, my friend.
Bye.
Bye.